I'd like to introduce John, who I've known for many years, who's with Planning Above and Beyond, and who is going to be doing something very interesting in a couple of weeks. So, John, do you just want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, simply to say, I've been working, running my own consultancy in research and in account planning for many years. But the thing I'd like to just mention is if this next hour whets your appetite and you're anywhere near the Market Research Conference, we will be doing a slightly different version of the discussion, looking more specifically at elicitation alongside automation. And we've managed to snag one of the keynote speakers, Oliver James, the psychologist, I think it is, as a psychiatrist, and author. So that'll be happening on March the 14th. So if you are thinking of coming to the MRS, please put that in your diaries. But without further ado, shall I introduce my glamorous panel, who I'm so delighted to have joined me today. First, Rachel, who I've collaborated with. I've been on a speaking platform with her, whatever. Now, Rachel runs Laws Consulting, and when it comes to matters of semiotics, cultural analysis, what else? Anthropology, and discourse analysis, which is the project where I worked with her last. Rachel is the person to talk to, so I thought it'd be really interesting to have her perspective when we get into some of these issues. And my other panel member is Natalie Geddes, who is an innovation director at ABA Research, not a million miles away from where I live. And because ABA is very much focused as a specialist on retail, I thought she'd be also a really interesting person in terms of her perspective on what we can do with research, what we can automate. And often when we're talking about automation, we're talking about moving things online rather than offline. So those are my co-panelists, Rachel Laws and Natalie Geddes.
Thank you, John. And I will introduce my two co-panelists. We've got Fiona from Mesh Experience, who, if you don't know them, then find out more about them, but have focused on utilizing people's mobile phones to get in-the-moment experiences. And Stephen from Zappy Store, who really are probably the loudest users of automation. And I'm just smiling because last week we had the Zappy band at the IX conference, who were clearly the loudest users of technology, at least for the evening, while they were performing, which was excellent. So welcome to everybody there. And I'm going to kick off with a thought, which I thought was not going to be contentious, but I suspect from the pre-warm-up that it might be. So if we think about automation, can we agree that successful automation always makes things faster and cheaper? And the reason I ask that is I think we should be focusing on quality and doing things better. But let's start with that point. Do we think that successful automation always means faster and cheaper? And Fiona, what are your thoughts?
Well, no, I would disagree with that, Ray, because I don't think that automation needs to be faster and cheaper to be successful. And I think we need to consider what the motivation is behind automating something. So, for example, if we're getting a dashboard together, it may actually take longer to do the analysis because we have more ability to follow a train of thought and to query the data. So the time we spend may take longer, the cost associated may be greater, but the output and the insight will be vastly superior. And therefore the motivation, I think, is what's really important when we're thinking about automation.
And John?
I'd like to relate automation to scaling, because I think, although scaling is still a relatively modern word, but the idea that one can decide the scale of a piece of research which is appropriate to what you're trying to do. And just because you can make it bigger or faster doesn't make it right. So if you can make the right business decision based on 200 or 500 people, just because the technology allows you to go to 5,000 or 50,000 doesn't of itself make it a better decision. So the danger is that automation allows us to make things bigger and more complicated in the belief that because we've made it faster and cheaper, it's better. I don't agree with it.
Okay, but can we agree that we'll focus on quality as an issue and doing things we couldn't before?
I think that's fair within an hour. Yeah.
Agreed.
Absolutely. So John, do you want to take the lead on where there have John, do you want to take the lead on where there have been quality concerns to date?
Okay. What I'd like to do is to bring in my co-panelists on this one, but before that, I just want to remind you that the research industry is in some turmoil. What are we going to do to solve our polling problems? There are issues about how we take samples and look at what happens with populations, which means that businesses and politicians are looking at us and saying, "Can you guys deliver?" So a race towards speed and reducing cost away from quality would alarm me. But let me bring in first Natalie to talk about her concerns about what may be going wrong. Natalie.
Yeah, hi there. I guess for a lot of the clients that we work with in terms of big retailers, we just increasingly see some of them using automation and just becoming busy fools. So in the end, it becomes a lot more expensive because they're running a huge amount of surveys and not getting to the root cause reason why things are going wrong. I think they forget that you just can't ask someone things like what's important to you or why you walking out of a shop or walking off of a website and not buying something, because a lot of the time they can't actually tell you, so you're not measuring the real emotions and what they're feeling at the time. So we come across quite a lot of problems with automation in that respect.
Okay. You mentioned facial coding?
Yeah, so we run big customer experience programs where you would rely on text analytics, engines and facial coding to try and unearth the emotions that people are telling you. But at the end of the day, there are lots of things that people just don't talk about in the text, or their faces don't bring about all the things that they've seen in a store or that they've seen online. So, I can guarantee someone will walk out of a shop, they'll never talk to you about displays or environment or all those cues, and you'll think, oh, it's not important in terms of my store experience, etc. I think they're the dangers that our clients are running into when it comes to automation.
Okay, thanks. Can I bring in Rachel also to talk more about social research? Social media, rather.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the sort of ways that we've been thinking about automation up to now don't take account of the fact that some automation is better than others. Not all of this stuff is equally good. And I think that right now we do a particularly poor job, for example, with social media. We haven't come up with the solutions we need with technology with regard to being able to make use of social media. You have to ask yourself what we're actually looking for. I'm sorry to say that one of the things that disappoints me a lot is sentiment analysis, where you're kind of collecting statements which are stripped of any context, which superficially express a positive or a negative sentiment about something. But the problem with that is that if you actually look at what people are doing in conversation, quite regularly they'll say one thing and mean something else completely. So they'll say things like, "Oh, I personally loved Assassin's Creed, and I don't apologise for that." Or they'll say, "Well, you definitely should not get that dress with the sequins. It'll damage your budget for designer kitchenware." And depending on the context, they mean the exact opposite of what they just said. What they've just said is, I acknowledge that there are reputation problems associated with the video game Assassin's Creed, and secondly, I don't care about cooking, and I think you should spend more money on clothes. And this happens on a regular basis, and when we've eventually developed some software that can tackle talk and linguistic behaviour with that level of sophistication, then we're in business. But until then, we're harvesting data that are kind of crushed into a shape that's no longer recognisable, and that's not helpful.
Okay, so if I can proceed that, it's almost as if the role in which human researchers have to play is undoing the things that automation does badly. It's not that necessarily automation may do things faster, but then you need to have the humans to kind of correct it afterwards. And is that really I just don't know how advisable it is really, to invest loads of money in some expensive tool that's going to tell you that it separates positive from negative remarks when in fact it cannot do that. We're just not there yet, and I think we need to expect more and be less satisfied with the technology that we currently have. Do you think we're being fair, Ray?
Up to a point, absolutely. I think that particularly taking up Natalie's point, about the DIY software platforms, let's not mention any of their names, can be misused because you get monkeys with dynamite was one of the phrases I heard. So you get people without any training in questionnaire design are now able to field studies. There isn't the requirement for somebody to stand in between somebody with a business problem and the survey instrument, and we're seeing some very strange surveys going out from that. Interesting enough, on Rachel's point, what I am seeing at the moment is that the vast majority of companies who are doing social media listening are hand coding sentiment analysis and then training a machine around the specific. They've actually, 5 years ago, they were automated, and most of them have pulled back. And I think the really interesting ones are people like BT, who there are only so many things that are said repeatedly in social media about BT, and so they've been able to train their systems to focus in on that. And what seems to be completely useless are, again, these self DIY tools where you can go in and just say, I can tackle that myself. I don't need an expert. I don't need somebody like Rachel or Natalie. I can do it myself. And that certainly would have seemed to have led to some quality issues.
I mean, isn't that something? It's a topic we will come back to, but isn't that good old-fashioned piloting? That's what they're actually doing.
No, I think that some of them, even if they were piloting it, would get it wrong. If you don't know the basics of what you can and can't ask in a question. Like, will you buy this?
Sure, but I would argue that manual coding is in effect a form of piloting, that's all.
Yes, I would take that. So, just to flip that on its head and come to Fiona and Stephen, where have you seen examples of quality improvements through automation? So, Stephen, do you want to go first? Sorry, I should have given you a clue there, really.
Sure, this is Steve. I think, to me, the critical thing is going back to what automation is and then deciding where it works. So what it is getting a computer to do a task that a human being was doing before. And so you would only do that if there are advantages to you automating that. And you may get that decision wrong, but you're not going to automate something that a human being does once, because it would be a waste of time to spend your time programming something to do something that a human does better because it's only once. So you want to automate tasks that a human being does multiple times and is relatively time-consuming and complex. So for me, something like an algorithm. So if you have a particular approach to market research where you ask 5 questions, you have an algorithm and a database and some norms, and you need to spit out a number that tells you that this product is good or this concept is poor, then that is a manual, time-consuming thing for a human being to do, and it's pretty instantaneous for a computer to do it. So it makes no sense not to automate that type of activity. Going back to what Rachel was talking about, computers can automate very, very high-end, very complex pieces of analysis. Trying to automate the coding of what a human being says is way, way more complicated than some fancy conjoint analysis based on Bayesian models. And frankly, computers aren't capable of doing it. So in that case, you wouldn't really set out to. I mean, you would be silly, and lots of people have been silly setting out to try and automate pure text analytics. But what, in fact, you can do is help get the computer to take some of the drudge work out of what the person is doing. So you just accept that the computer can only get you 70% of the way there. In something like text analytics, it can get you 100% of the way in some sort of conjoint, and you use it appropriately in that way.
Rachel here, I'd quite like to respond to that, actually. I think that we should raise our expectations a bit higher. I think that eventually, with the right sort of input, we might be able to develop software that can handle text and discourse at that level of sophistication. You know, I don't think we're there yet, but I think that you know, as a semiotician, when somebody says you definitely should not get that dress, for me the key word is definitely, and you know, you could do an empirical study of how the word definitely is used in British English and probably conclude that a certain percentage of the time it's being used in a kind of ironic way or to problematise something. It's just that nobody has asked for this kind of input in the development of technological solutions so far. Maybe they should start now.
I think I agree with your sentiment, but an awful lot of people are working on exactly what that problem is. I'm just pointing out the fact that they haven't solved it. But are they looking at those exact problems? Absolutely. I mean, and we're constantly monitoring where companies are getting to, but they're just not. They're not beyond 70%, or not that we've really seen. And Ray, presumably you're looking at the same stuff.
Very much so. And given that humans disagree, so we might have a semiotician in the room, and then we might have somebody who liked Foucault's analysis of text and somebody else who was a conversation analyst, and they would come up with a different picture, and our machine will have to come up with one of those three or one of the other 500 ways of doing the analysis. But I think we want to focus at the moment. I'm very keen we come back to where things are going later in the debate. But Fiona, where have you seen successes?
Thank you very much, Ray. Well, I've got a couple of examples that I thought might be interesting for the audience. One is where we have automated some logistic regression analysis. So at MESH, what we try to do is we look at the touch points that people experience, and then we want to understand what impact those have on brand metrics. And to do this work has taken a lot of preparation of data, running the actual analysis, and we've been able to automate this. And the benefits that we've seen are that it reduces human error. You obviously get faster results, which gives you more time to focus on interpreting the data. But I think crucially, going back to your earlier point, we have the ability now to process larger data sets that we just couldn't do before. So it gives us an opportunity to do the things we couldn't do. So that was one example, and I'm sure that other people and other companies will have similar areas where they're doing analytics that can be repetitive, and that certain elements of that can be automated. The second one was, because I went to the MESH team to say, you know, tell me some good examples. And the other one I really liked because I wouldn't have thought about it. And this came from our operations team. And they'd done some very simple automation. They'd automated sending out reminders to our participants. And what they said was not only did that save time, but the way that that automation has worked is it's helped to improve our relationships with our partners, because this automation helps them too. And I really like that, because that's a very human thing that has come through as a result of a very simple piece of automation.
Oh, that's super, Fiona, yes. And coming back to your first point, when I was studying A-level statistics many, many years ago in the 1970s, we used to calculate means and standard deviations with mechanical calculators where you turn the handle. And I have to say the automation of using Excel has been a delight by comparison with how we used to, and now we calculate more things and with larger data sets. There's a really interesting question. There are 2 or 3 questions coming through from the listeners, and I want to pick up one here from Peter Chopra, and particularly for you, John, perhaps, which is, we're talking about some of the quality issues with automation, and Rachel highlighted the human element, but if we think about quality and market research, would we say human managed and human designed market research has been a success? Have we been delivering quality?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think
in the light of the panels as well. In the light of the polling questions.
Yes. Sorry, in the light of the which questions?
The polling debacles, especially, perhaps.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and you could argue that there is bias which has been introduced. I fully grant that. I suppose this is when I do put on my qualitative hat and it's the anxiety of thinking, when we remove humanity from the equation, does it make the work better or worse? I appreciate that humans are prone to make mistakes and to be careless, and we are mindful of the biases that humans introduce. Having said that, the empathy that humans bring to understanding if something's effective is also very powerful. Let me give you a very specific example. I remember an agency, a pharma agency, explaining that they improved the quality of their work by allowing interviewers to give a single field in the questionnaire as to how good the interview had been, because actually no one but that interviewer, face-to-face interviewer, was able to judge it. So I give that as an example that you can give me all sorts of examples of human error, but I also think that human empathy and judgment I have a huge, I value hugely.
If we stick with that for a moment, you, Stephen.
Sorry, no, that was John, I think.
Okay, John, do you have something else you wanted to add?
No. I was basically, I wondering if I should bring in my colleagues, but no, I was done.
Okay, let's do that. I'm going to throw one more curveball around that topic. So, for many, many years, market researchers asked questions like, which of these is the most important to you? And we now hear from all of the System 1, the System 2, that actually those direct questions are not very helpful. So if we had automated our previous way of doing business, we would probably not be any worse, but certainly not any better. And so any thoughts about those issues, Rachel or Natalie?
Can you just reword that slightly, Ray?
Okay, so really anything you fancy around this topic of challenging whether the human element has been producing quality in market research to date. So we're worried about automation, but is it the biggest problem?
There are always problems. There are always problems. The major problem with or without automation is that we don't always know why we're doing the things we do. You know, so we've got huge numbers of people who kind of go out and do interviews with no clear theory about what an interview is. Collecting data in a way that is kind of convenient, shall we say, or is appealing, or is I don't know, a kind of hot topic for the client, but if if you don't have any good quality theory built into that, then you're not going to get dazzling results out of that. That said, I think the market research industry really, since its inception, has kind of made a big effort to be progressive, and there are a lot of very committed, very passionate people involved. It's just been very patchy. So I think that the market research has kind of been patchy and variable in how useful it is, how kind of robust it is, with or without automation. Really, I just think that automation perhaps makes it a particularly acute issue that we need to pay attention to.
I think to sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I think to build on that, it's not just the quality of the questions you're asking. I mean, you could have the greatest System 1 measurement tool in the world, but then if you are delivering insights that are just, I think you still see too many research agencies just delivering interesting data. What's the data saying without any kind of emotive story? Then, what is the point in having great quality measurement if you're then not delivering a quality piece of deliverable?
Yeah, I think from an automator's perspective, I think if you have a situation where you have an agency and they do a lot of concept testing and they tend to use the same sort of approach each time, but they might have 10 different researchers leading projects, and one of them is significantly better than the others and 3 of them are poor, and that's typical within a lot of agencies. What you want to do is automate the best person. So what we should be looking at is automating best practice rather than just automating a thing. And in that way, it leads to an enormous improvement in the quality, not only of the setup and the design, but the analysis. You can automate the report writing, and then you can take your best researcher on a particular topic, automate their processes, their thinking, their data patterns, and then you get the ability to have that person effectively running your project every time you run a project in whatever country you run it in.
I really like that, Steve. This is Fiona here, because I think it basically encapsulates best practice. And through running an agency over time, I know that even when you have processes that you've written up and looked at, some can still get forgotten. And some of that best practice doesn't always get encapsulated. But I think when you can automate it, it brings the quality up higher throughout.
So we've got a cri de coeur from one of our regular friends, John Story, as well, talking about how many bad pieces of automation and data he's seen from digital agencies, very much agreeing with Natalie. So, John, do you want to take us into the next stage about what do we think the threats are? We're going to look at threats and opportunities now for the next 30, 40 minutes, and we'll start with threats, and then we'll start with finish with the optimistic note of opportunities.
Okay. I want to start off with piloting, something we referred to before in connection with the manual coding of sentiment analysis, but the wider issue, because it seems to me that good practice says that before I scale up, before I use a questionnaire with a group of respondents, I need to understand that they are understanding that questionnaire as I set it. And in the past, we always checked that manually. We even did it within the team, inside, etc., etc. My worry with automation that is happening so fast that there isn't time for that piloting anymore. So the first issue I'd want to introduce is that. I'll put the next two in, and then maybe we can pick them off one after the other. So that's the first one, which is whatever happened to piloting. Someone fell over. Whatever happened to piloting. Point two is about context, because the great thing about research was that when it was methodologically specific, you knew that someone was on their home phone, you knew that someone was in a high street being talked to, but on the internet no one knows quite where you are. And if the topic is the internet, that's fine, but if actually you're trying to find someone that could be in the supermarket, they could be at home, they could be at work, actually context is important. And then the third area that I want to look at is just the overall dumbing down, which is actually, in effect, that the faster we go and the more money comes into the research industry, and we know that a lot of money is coming in precisely to automate, can we resist the siren song of the money so that actually the quality standards will fall, because as long as it's faster and cheaper, that's all that matters. So can I sort of take in those three headings, just comment on that. Piloting. Natalie, do you still pilot questionnaires?
We do, yes.
I mean,
I think it's really important. I think user testing is incredibly important. So yeah, we always qualitatively test our quant surveys. Yeah.
And I mean, do you find that there's pressure online, particularly when you're doing online surveys, that somehow that gets missed out? I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that's the fear that somehow. I'm relieved to hear that you're still piloting.
Yeah, I think in the big world of customer experience, then there's a lot of just let's get this survey out as quickly as possible, and forget about the user experience behind it.
Right. Okay. Rachel, did you want to talk about piloting at all? I mean, do you pilot the work you do?
To any kind of cultural research, there's discourse analysis, semiotics, and ethnography. For me, those things are an ongoing process of testing your hypotheses as they emerge. So there actually isn't a clear dividing line between collecting data and interpreting data, because you analyse as you go. So in a sense, the whole project is pilot tested on a moment-to-moment basis. You have to be very quick to recognise what's going on and quick to adapt. You might need a change of research strategy. And again, I think this is an area where automation is going to struggle to intervene. Really, we don't currently have any solutions that will work and respond rapidly to change in the research environment.
Yes, I mean we don't have anyone I think on the call today who was involved so early in quantitative research that they had done psychoanalysis and so on. But the basic understanding within qualitative is it just me? I've noticed this, but I could be wrong. So that idea of of doubt being built into, I think I've got this right, but I'm not sure if I have, seems to me to be quite important. So I suppose the challenge I'd want to push out is, if we're not piloting anymore, where is the place for that doubt? To say, have we got this right? This piece of automation, how do I know when it's working, and when do I decide that it's not?
Well, I'm going to start, I'm going to call Steve in here on the quant side of it, because the best practice in our industry for online surveys is that you do the soft launch. You get 50 completes, you analyze them through, you read the verbatims, which include a comment, any comments about this survey or this topic. So piloting is in all of the manuals, it's in all of the university courses. Anybody that does University of Georgia, anybody that does the MRS course will know that they are supposed to do that with online surveys. Does it always happen? I suspect not. But there is a big alternative, I would say, to piloting, which is reusing previously piloted and proven questionnaires, which is where I will call Stephen in.
Thank you, Ray. That's exactly what I was thinking. I think when you're talking about doing an ad hoc one-off survey where you are creating a questionnaire and throwing it out to a panel, the fact that you don't pilot it has got nothing to do with automation. It's to do with bad research practice. So you should be piloting it. You aren't, and that's because you're a bad researcher. That's a human error, nothing to do with automation. The way to overcome that is exactly what Ray is suggesting, which is you pilot the best practice, and you pilot and test multiple times the best way of asking whether you like a concept, the best way of finding out brand awareness, the best way of finding out what people do on a Saturday afternoon, best way of finding out what hobbies are. Then you structure them. You say, okay, I've tested those. I know the best way of looking at it. I know the best way of asking. I know the best way of analyzing it. Now I'm going to automate. Once I've honed my best practice, I then automate. You don't automate before or on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, how does that sound to you?
It sounds persuasive. I suppose my question is, and when do you revisit? Because my understanding of the scaling of what Zapistore specifically does is, once you've got those questions right, not only do you use them many times in a single month with a particular client, but you might be using them thousands of times, tens of thousands of times over a 3 to 5 year period. What sorts of checks and balances have you got in when you start to get that niggling doubt that either the language is changing or the culture is changing and it's not quite working the way it used to? Have you had that yet?
We anticipate it. So we have each product that's on the store, for instance, we will have 9-month or 12-month reviews. It tends not to be so. I think the interesting example is moving from more rational-based metrics to System 1-based metrics. It's not, again, it's not really a case of it to do with automation. It's to do with a market trend. It's to do with the way the agency's thinking is changing. And so the agency that's using us as an automation platform will say, you know, we used to ask it in this way. Now we've done some testing. We've got some new IP. We've had some better thinking about it. We want to make the amend. Or a new agency comes along with a new solution that clients like. So the IP to me is outside of the framework of automation. The IP creation and keeping that up to date, and then once you've made that decision and you've piloted it and you've tested it and you've validated it and you make sure it's absolutely right, then you make the change within the automation system, which gives you scale.
Okay. I mean, I buy that. I think where it becomes problematic is that where an agency acquires a reputation for running things in a particular way, of which Millward Brown being the classic example, where once you've got a history of asking the same question in the same sort of a way for 10, 20 years, the benchmarks become so important that it becomes very, very difficult to change, even when it's not working. So I think the challenge would be actually having the confidence to be able to say, because each of these surveys is discrete, you can change it without fear of recriminations from a client that says, I don't like that because I've asked that particular question for so long, I'll be all adrift.
I do think I need to defend Millward Brown here, who are one of our partners, one of several. But if you ask them, they would say they were constantly reanalyzing, constantly re-looking at the ways they ask questions, the way they analyze data. They've got a big neuroscience practice, as I'm sure you know about, and they're thinking, and they're bringing in facial coding. We're helping them bring that hopefully in at scale, etc., etc. So they will be And market forces create that. I mean, they will be because they believe and are passionate about research, and clients will make them do it because clients want new things and new thinking.
Sure, it's a cheap shot because in the end we're talking here about piloting, not benchmarking. But I take your point.
So, John, do you want to move? We need to move along. So, do you want to take your second point, which I think was context?
Okay. It was context. In other words, where is the internet, and why do things happen? Now, the scaling or the automation which the internet has allowed means that we're not quite sure where anyone is. And I still remember moderating my first online internet group and realizing that the respondents were scattered across the entire country, and so they weren't in the same places either. And that was really quite disorienting when I was used to having everyone sitting in one room. Rachel, did you want to comment on this and the issue of context when we are asking questions?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. I mean, if we just want to, briefly revisit one of the examples I mentioned earlier, which is actually I was paraphrasing something that I saw recently in a live conversation between two consumers. Two women, her friends, one said, you definitely should not get that dress, it'll damage your budget for kitchenware. And in order to interpret that remark, you would have to root back through about 7 years of conversation to understand that they've got this long history together where one of them encourages the other in being less domestic and, kind of going out more, having a more frivolous social life. Without knowing that stuff, it's impossible really to make sense of this remark. You definitely should not get that dress with the sequins. It will damage your budget for kitchenware. That's a deeply sarcastic thing to say, actually, and but also it's something which, in order to pick up on the sarcasm, you would have to have been aware of this long relationship they've got together. And I think this is one of the advantages of methods like ethnography, in the sense that you can spend time with people and find out about their real-life social networks and the relationships that are influencing their thought patterns and the things they say. And, maybe one of the things that we mentioned earlier as well, John, was the idea that quite often when people say these kind of contradictory things, it's because they're paying attention to two different agendas. There's a private agenda, which is what they really want to say, and then there's the public agenda, which they're obliged to acknowledge in order to be allowed to speak. And so that's a very complex situation, and there's not a time in the immediate future when we're going to be able to remove the human from identifying what's going on there.
So to give a very specific example, the thing I might say, or the film I might make with my mobile phone on the facings, when I tell everyone that these snacks for my kids are not very good for me, may be very different to the film that I might make of someone snacking on a train, or even myself snacking on a train, doing something of which I disapprove. And if I'm starving, I've had a long day at work, and so on and so forth, the social context of what I'm doing on a train is different from what I'm saying in a store about making good decisions. And I think it's that issue about, are we sampling the people, or are we sampling the context, or even the culture, which is around the places where they are?
It absolutely is about the culture. I completely agree with you there, and this is one of the fascinating things. This is the reason why I take this kind of postmodern cultural approach to research, because what we've had previously, and that still exists in this form of survey research and attitude research, is that we ask people these linear questions, like, what's your attitude to snacks? What are your feelings about snacks? And assume that they only have one point of view. But on almost any issue that's even slightly important, there's at least two agendas in place. So that, on the one hand, everybody loves eating snacks and junk food, and will kind of rationalise it to themselves and make a place for it in their lives and figure out how to make that work so that they can have it, give themselves a space to consume that stuff. But at the same time, they're prisoners of their own culture, in which there may be very strong local norms that say that you have to at least pay lip service to health, which is what precipitates all of this kind of persuasion and kind of rhetorical arguments around the reasons why it's okay to have snacks. I did a project on tea quite recently, and there's an entire segment of tea drinkers who you would think are the world's biggest experts on tea. They know everything about it. They go to events. They're not actually interested in tea. If you spend a lot of time with them, there's a significant but small segment of these people who are actually interested in cake. That's what they really want. And the tea is a kind of cake delivery mechanism. That's what's going on there. there are individual and social agendas in play in almost every case that you can think of.
It makes sense to ask Fiona what she thinks of this, because obviously your product, Fiona, is about measuring people and their opinions of things in different contexts. So how would you respond to this?
Thank you, John. Yes, I was on the edge of my chair wanting to get in on that one. Because, of course, mobile has totally changed the way that we can look at research. Because we can be getting people's responses in the context that is important to them at the time. And when they're eating a snack at one time and telling you about that, it can be very, very different from when they're eating a snack at another time. So I think that mobile has totally revolutionized where the industry can go. And I think there's so much more potential that we can be using it for. And it's great to see context now being talked about so much more widely than it was even 10 years ago.
But just to push on a bit, Fiona, how do you handle conflict? Do you notice conflict in the data you're collecting?
I remember somebody, yes, you do. So, for instance, I remember somebody saw an ad for a particular brand first thing in the morning, and the comment was, oh, I really don't want to be reminded of that like now. But it was quite a funny, humorous poster, and later that day they were with their mates, they were all joking about it, and they liked it. So the context had changed within one day of how somebody responded to one execution.
Okay, fair comment. Let me go on to my third point, because I'm mindful of time, and this is the general one of dumbing down, that basically where does this end? The danger being that the more money is thrown at things, the faster we get, the more we're able to do things, the more clients have a whole supermarket full of methodologies they can use. In effect, they think less and less about quality. And I suppose it's really looking at what a research agency brings to the party in terms of how it interprets the data and what it does with it. And that's why I wanted to bring in Natalie to talk about that, and particularly about storytelling and the way in which research agencies do something with the data to present it back to their clients. Natalie?
Yeah, I mean, you know, maybe in the future when robots have taken over from all of us, probably the last part of what they'll take over is creativity. And I guess one of the key things that we as an agency try to bring is that creative storytelling. So sifting through multiple strands of data, and even, you know, you can build lots of algorithms to sift through all your retail data, and you're almost flooded by the amount of data you've got nowadays. You need still that human touch to look through it all and pull together a compelling story. I guess one interesting insight is where we've seen the increasing kind of automation of vox pop software, where we're increasingly asking people to tell us what they're thinking, feeling by sending us in a video. And I think a lot of those agencies like Vox Pop Me would say all that, you know, it gives them a nice emotive view of what the customer's thinking, feeling, but, you know, we see it integrated into businesses, and it gets a bit of traction at the beginning, but then it really quickly loses traction because it has a low response rate. People aren't great giving amazing videos, and so, you know, Joe on his phone telling us about their retail experience doesn't get as much traction as the gorgeous emotive video content that we can pull together that really helps customers have a voice within a business and helps some kind of commercial change. Yeah, that's my view on it.
Okay, so, and I think the other thing which I think would concern me slightly with the whole dumbing down is whether samples are becoming more and more standardized. I saw that there's an online research community which is now putting a button on their website so that a brave client can now start to pipe their stuff straight in to have their DIY research community. Isn't there a real danger of standardization where instead of looking at particular samples of particular customer bases with particular experiences, everything gets homogenized to 1,000 adults?
I'm going to call.
Do you want to respond to any of this?
I'm going to call Stephen in a second, John, but I would just like to come to that standardization point first, because I think that every time we look at standardization, which is an essential element of automation and actually of scaling as well, you have a choice. One type of standardization is the cookie cutter, and that is something we would all hate. The other is Lego.
Yeah.
I can build anything I want from Lego. The last thing I want, however, is somebody to give me a gift which is Meccano or Connects, because I can't use it with my Lego. And I think that as long as we're developing Lego and not cookie cutters, then we're going to be in the right space. But John, I think, Stephen, I think part of what we've just heard from John and Natalie speaks to an alternative solution, the agile methodology, where it might be less good, but you're doing it more times in order to get a better end result.
Yes, I mean, I would say I think Natalie's absolutely right about one element of storytelling, which is the creative part. I do think the idea that you need researchers sifting through large quantities of data is wrong, because actually computers are much better at doing that. Computers are much better at finding patterns, finding anomalies, finding interesting things in data than human beings are. What human beings are much better at doing is taking that insight, and I would argue taking that story and telling the story. So it's the persuasion. You know, if you do an ad test and it says it's a great ad or it's a crappy ad and needs changing, someone has got to take that message to the marketing director. It's got to persuade the ad agency that they need to scrap it or that they need to, and that's a complex, creative human job to make that persuasive case. And that's where I would like to see researchers spend more of their time. Yeah, sorry.
Super. Okay, keeping an eye on the clock, what are we going to do now is move into what do we see as the opportunities. And let's just ask the four faces along the bottom there, that's Fiona, Stephen, Natalie and Rachel, to say, what do you see as the opportunities for automation in your zone, your area of interest over the next 3-4 years, let's say? Let's start with you, Fiona.
Thank you, Ray. Well, for me, I think it's freeing up time. So I think that whereas more traditional quantitative research, you would look at tables coming through, they would lead to some questions, you would then need to get more tables, and this would take time. Now, if you've got data in the right format, you can lead your own story through it, and therefore your mind is working much faster and you're answering the questions much more fluidly. So I think for me, it's about automation, freeing up the time to do more consultancy and to think about how the results and the insights can best be framed to help the organization to actually make the changes that are necessary.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, I agree very strongly with that. I think if you start from the premise that we're going to automate best practice, what you have is immediately results a few things. One, a significant improvement in the quality of research in general, and then it is also much faster and cheaper to access, which means potentially a big democratization of insight. So there, you know, we can spread our wings as an industry into the SME space, the small medium enterprise space. We can move from clients, larger clients, testing a product once before it's launched to testing it in an agile perspective. So test early and test often, as we would encourage our clients to do. So I think the corollary with that is that you end up having the ability of research consultants on top of it to stop worrying about project management, to stop worrying about the analytics, and to start worrying about persuading their clients and helping their clients make better business decisions. So I think it's a hugely bright future for our industry as long as people are able to make that transition to being genuinely strategic consultants.
Natalie?
Yeah, I would echo what Fiona said. I think there is an opportunity in that it takes away some of the almost banal and dull parts of that we might be doing as market researchers and allow us to focus on our storytelling and creative insights. I would say it probably opens up opportunities for just the best research agencies to survive, in that the ones that are just describing data might get killed by automation quicker than others, I guess.
And Rachel, your upside in terms of automation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't do my job without digital culture, and it's incredibly exciting. It might be like one of the most exciting things that's ever happened, and so I have to wonder why the most exciting aspect of that haven't been a feature of this debate. There's enough so far, this debate specifically, and the wider debate in the industry as well. If you just think for a minute about the semiotics of the word automation, which is what we're here to discuss, look at what that implies. We think of automation as somehow excluding this so-called human element, which means creativity and interpretation, and perhaps therefore being more objective as well as being faster and cheaper. But actually, the part of technological advancement in research that I'm really excited about, and that I think we are doing really, really well with, is data visualization. This is an area that really embraces human creative intervention. We're not pretending that the human element is not there. It celebrates the human element. The creativity and the interpretation is first and foremost. And so if we wanted to, for my money, if we want to look for what's exciting and really groundbreaking in market research in the upcoming future, data visualization is what I would want to look at. There's some very creative people out there.
Mm.
And John?
So many things to echo. I think the ability that automation has to amplify what humans do, so we do it better, and we spend the best parts of our day and our energies doing our best work rather than doing the drudgery. I totally echo that. I suppose the nervousness has been where we use it to replace things, so we end up doing things less well. But I think in terms of amplifying, being able to work with larger data sets, I've sort of sat in overheated rooms for far too long as a 4 or 5 country study grinds to a halt because the amount of data coming in is so horrendous, and you've got 2 or 3 hours of workshop to somehow pull it all together, and the chance for cock-ups is massive. Any way in which automation can make that simpler and allow us to make smarter decisions, I've got to be in favour of it.
Super. What I'm going to do now is run through some of the questions we've got in and allocate them, and I'm going to grab the first one, which is what automation do we see being applied to qualitative research? And I was lucky enough to do a webinar on this a couple of weeks ago, so I can probably pull the top point pretty much straight off my head. First impact is logistics. So people are more likely to turn up to the right place for the focus group. They're more likely to be booked. They're more likely to be paid promptly. They're more likely to have their the digital recordings of the in-depth interviews. So all of that stuff, big positive. It's already happened, and it's going to continue improving. And almost every aspect of that is good, I would suggest. The second is there will be no viable, useful robots running moderated groups and in-depth interviews in our next 2 to 3 year window. It's going to come, but don't panic. We'll see driverless cars before we see moderatorless focus groups. So that's the face-to-face side of it. The third one is online qualitative. Online qualitative, we are going to see more automated probing. We're going to see slightly larger groups. It makes your life easy. You can post your questions while you're not there. The next one along is, and it comes back to Rachel's point a moment ago about auto. So autoethnography, which is where people do it themselves. We are enlisting more and more people, and we're going to develop better tools to help those people capture slices of their own life, share it back with us, and have discussions. And the final element is not that the data, qualitative data or artifacts are going to be analyzed automatically, but they are going to be much more searchable, addressable, storable. We will be able to say, did anybody else say something like this in this data set? Did anybody else show a video that looked like this? And those sort of issues will make people with sort of Rachel's analytic skills even more productive. It won't replace, but it will make productivity higher. We'll be able to reach further. So anybody else want to chime in on what might happen to qualitative research in the next 2 to 3 years?
Can I just very quickly comment on the threat from artificial intelligence on open questions, where you've got vast data sets? It's so simple to collect lots of open-ended questions.
John, I'm going to say no, because I want to come back, and I'll go to you next. I want to specifically tackle AI on its own, because I think it is a major issue.
Okay, so just very, so it's a subset of this, which is I've struggled with keywording on things as ways of indexing data, and I would like to see more thematic coding, but I'll leave it to others at this stage. I'm not happy with. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, this is Fiona. I'd just like to mention the looking at videos and the coding of those and the libraries of those. I think some of the work that the Big Sofa's doing is really interesting in that area.
But again, Fiona, I think it's more in the case of making people more productive rather than replacing people.
Yes.
Okay, so we have got several people asking questions about AI. So, John, lead us off. Specifically, what do you think is likely to happen? What are your concerns? And what are your hopes?
Okay, my concerns are that because it is the whole structure of the internet has been what I would describe as fundamentalist, where keywords are used for SEO, they're used for AdWords, and so on and so forth. They're increasingly used to recruit people. That we have an overly simplified way of looking at meaning, which is based on individual words, and that's why I just think that it's absolutely essential that we have a layer above all of that, which I still perceive to be human, though I'm willing to concede that AIs might get onto it eventually, which is about context, which is about thematic understanding, which we could put as codes within texts and within videos to make sense of them. But so far, I've been disappointed by the tools we've had, and I wouldn't unleash a robot on it anytime soon until we get a lot more sophisticated about meaning. I'll leave it at that.
So who else wants to chip in on AI, or even the conferences they've attended about AI, Stephen?
Yeah, sure. So I would say I think, I mean, AI comes in lots of forms and does lots of different things. I do think on the thematic side, John, I think now almost all the text analytics software I've been hearing about looks at sentence and not word, because for exactly the problem that you specify. Yes. The reality is that they're still only at 70% for the things that Rachel has been talking about. Yeah. I think one of the exciting things that machine learning technology enables us to do is get an awful lot more insight out of the data we've been collecting. So let's take a market research company that's done 1,000 tracking studies, and we can all think of lots of them. Still, when they are looking for insight, they are looking for insight from the one tracking study for the one client that they are working on right now. What they're not doing is saying, oh, actually, this data pattern, an increase in awareness 1 week followed by an increase in a key image attribute the next week leads to something else. They can't do that sort of predictive analytics because they're only looking at one one tracking study. What machine learning will enable us to do is to look at all 1,000 studies simultaneously in under a second and say, oh my God, I've seen that pattern there, that pattern over here. I've seen it 3 times. Every time it's led to this one output. So I can now predict the outcome of what's going to happen in your tracking study next month. Well, that becomes very powerful. And it's exactly the sort of thing that we're working on, and others I'm sure are working on as well. And I think it's a sort of approach that should double or treble the value of the existing research we've already got. I would then add in the idea of integrating other data sets, which isn't necessarily an AI thing, but AI or machine learning specifically will be able to take that additional data and again add layers of meaning, layers of insight, which should again be very powerful for our clients.
So, does anybody else want to chip in on the AI threats, opportunities, predictions? Okay, we've got a very straight... Sorry, yes, please, Rachel, then we've got another question after that.
All right, just quickly, I was just wanted to say, like, the radical suggestion of why don't we do some stuff that's exciting for consumers? AI interviewing is a problem because consumers don't like talking to robots, but they are excited about technology and what it can do. And so I kind of want to say, if we're going to invent all this clever new stuff, why don't we give some of it to consumers and see what they want to do with it and how they want to use it, and evolve some new analytic research methods from there? How about that?
Absolutely. I saw a great example of somebody grabbing the bull by the horns. A couple of days ago, Lenny Murphy made a suggestion about using Amazon Echo and Alexa and very quickly somebody else then mocked up a simple system where Alexa could have a discussion with you about some topic of interest, and you could see how that could be embodied within research. So its whole point.
Yeah, exactly. If we've got some toys, if
Yes.
we've got some toys, why don't we just share the toys with the consumers, let them play and see what I might come up with something good that we haven't thought of.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've now got a very specific question, and I'd be interested to hear pretty much everyone's thoughts on it briefly, which is 4 years' time, do we think there'll be more or fewer people employed in the MR industry? So, John, you can go first. We'll go anti-clockwise.
I think less will be involved, simply because that's what I'm hearing from my colleagues in quant houses, and the very fact that quant houses are getting involved with Zapistore and so on, it seems to me, is that they're recognizing that the tide is going out, and increasingly the level of surveys that the clients need and the speed in which they want them is going beyond the human, and that is going to hit our that's going to hit the number of people working in the business. Yes.
Rachel?
I don't think it's a question of whether it's going to be more or fewer people. I think it's a case of different people, and that we're going to see people who are really creative with technology, the kind of data visualization specialists that I was mentioning earlier, making more of an impact in the industry. I welcome our new colleagues.
Natalie?
Yeah, I agree with Rachel. I think what we see is just a different type of person working in consumer insight, and their skills need to continue evolve, and also customer experience and consumer insight teams linking up more. So all in all, it means that there's kind of there's no difference really.
Stephen?
I would say a lot more. I would say double or treble the number now. I think we're moving from a world which is really a craft world, and when you move from a craft world to a mass production world, it may well be, everyone's right, that the job changes, but I think the demand massively increases because you can enable people to use insight an awful lot more than they are now. And frankly, I think if you think about the industry and our impact on business decisions, it could be much, much bigger. But we're too often not in the room, and I think this will enable us to get into the room. And so I can see the size of the industry doubling or trebling. Maybe not an exact increase in terms of people, but a lot more consultants would be required to really bring that to life and help people make better decisions.
Fiona?
I agree. I think there will be more people. I think as an industry, we've already been broadening our scope. And I think that was some of the work that was done by the MRS 2 or 3 years ago. I think we will define ourselves much more broadly. We'll have different people within the industry, and we will get more utilised. So I agree. I think it'll be more.
Okay, well, I will start off with the historical note that automation has probably cost our industry well over 1 million jobs so far. Those are the face-to-face interviewers that used to knock on doors and stand in the streets. They were the people who typed up the double entry punch card that John and I were talking about earlier. They were the people who posted the questionnaires around the country and opened them. They were the people who did that tallying up. Then they were the people who made the phone calls into CAT interviewing. And they have, around the world, a tremendous number of those people have lost their employment in our industry. Now, some of them will have been re-employed in other tasks, and hopefully that'll move forward. I think the challenge we're now seeing is that the threats to employment are going to be people like us rather than people who are out in the field doing a really hard job on a really low income. It's now actually people doing a really hard job on a moderately low income in many cases. And I think Natalie probably hit the nail on the head with her comment earlier that some companies will go out of business. I think there is no reason why the industry should not grow and total employment increase. But I am sure that some companies will go bust as part of this process.
Can I just make a comment on this? And that is to say that your question was whether research and whether the industry was going to shrink in terms of the number of people within it or grow. My belief is that the industry will shrink, but that more people will be using research. So I think actually what's being represented here is a democratization of research, so that actually research is more available to more people than ever before, but I think there'll be less research professionals per se, card-carrying researchers doing it, that's all.
Now we've got a couple of questions here that relate to how we might see things like AI being used to analyze patterns in the data, but also used to, when we create stories, coming back to what Natalie was saying in particular, Rachel, this story making, that the AI tools might challenge us and say, no, that is not the most valid story from this data set. Do we see that as a potential for AI, something that would actually challenge our thinking and processes? Anybody on the panel?
So this is Steve. Absolutely. As I said before, I think computers are much better at understanding stories within data, and are much better at determining the appropriate pattern and the likely meaning of the data. Now, what they can't do, or they find an awful lot harder to do, is relate it to the human beings within an organization. So if you have a product that tests really well, does that mean that that organization should go ahead with it? It may do, but maybe the marketing director doesn't want to go in that direction. So it tested really well, but it tested as great tasting, and actually all of the focus is on thirst quenching. And so it's not the right product for that company and that group of people at that time. That, I think, remains a human task, but the human we should not be thinking that we're the best at finding the story, but thinking that we're best at telling the story.
So let's just wrap up from there. We're past the hour, so if we start with Fiona, then Stephen, Natalie, Rachel, and then you, John. We came in here asking what were the opportunities and the threats. So what is the main thing that you're taking out of our discussion today? Fiona?
I think it is about the opportunities of storytelling for the future, getting rid of some of the more monotonous tasks. And I think that will open up our ability to provide real added value to clients.
So this is Steve. I think I agree. I think the question for the industry is not whether we automate, but what we automate. Mm-hmm. What and also how. And we need to think very carefully about ensuring that we don't automate what we can't, and also what we don't need to. There are lots of things we don't need to automate. But when we can use it, let's embrace it and automate really well, automate best practice, just improve quality, and then spend our time doing the much more interesting strategic things.
Yeah, it's Natalie here. Yeah, I agree with those. I guess I would echo on top of that the other aspects people talked about in terms of just improving the quality of things like text analytics, harnessing Alexa and facial coding and sentiment analysis. I think we want it to move quicker than it is at the moment. So it'll be exciting to see how it changes.
Rachel here. Yes, I agree. It is exciting to see what's happening, and I guess the takeaway for me from this has been my ideas are now stimulated around this idea of using technologies to tell stories. I kind of want to say that the medium is the message, and so the upshot of that is that, yes, of course, the technology to a large extent makes a decision about what kind of story you're going to tell, and I think we need to be aware of that so that we can make best possible use of it.
So, John, this debate was very much your idea, and thank you for bringing it forward. So do you want to summarise the whole picture, and we'll close it down from there and move on to the thank yous and the close. So,
my goodness,
you to finish.
Right, I've got 60 seconds in this, right? Okay.
If you need 2, 4, 5 minutes, John, you take it. You're closing the discussion out.
Oh my goodness. No, don't give me that much rope. I think I would want to start with where my co-panelists have just been speaking, which is about automation being a good servant, but a bad master. And I feel actually it's been a remarkably harmonious debate that actually, from different perspectives, I think all of us have been agreeing with one another. Where there was a difference in opinion was this matter of speed and cost. I think that's where there was sort of people chipping in and saying, I'm not sure about that, I'm more uncomfortable with that, because the fear is that the agenda of money coming into the industry, of increasing speed and reducing costs, actually it is in danger of turning automation from being an immensely good servant and immensely valuable to being a bad master. So the things I would just pick up on is that I've been reassured to hear about piloting, and in fact the piloting is still going on, and so if you are working with a research agency which has forgotten about it, please carry on doing it. The comments that we've been making also about context and recognizing that in the internet and automation has actually made it possible for us to get into context in ways that we never have before, but let's not be naive about that, and that also that there is a unique contribution which research professionals play, and I think if anyone took Luddism away from this discussion, they shouldn't, because I don't think we've heard a single Luddite point of view on this, but that what's so important is that we get the best out of our researchers, and automation can help us do that. So if I don't sound too equivocal on that, I think it's been a good day for automation, because it's actually shown that when automation is in its place, it can be incredibly valuable.
Thank you, John, and thank you to everybody on the panel.